Hello there. I just wanted to put down some thoughts about how some of the elemental archetypes can work. I think this is a revisiting of an area in some ways, but hopefully it will be worthwhile. I'm mainly going to talk about the quadrant archetypes, which on the circle of archetypes are the ones that are sort of at the corners in a sense. They are the air and water archetypes, the water and fire archetypes, the earth and air archetypes, and the earth and fire archetypes in both kind of permutations. So that's 8 in total. Then not the cardinal archetypes, which kind of form the two main axes of the wheel. Those cardinal archetypes they have almost a sort of purer energy in some senses, in that they are single-gendered by element. In other words, they are fire and air, air and fire, and earth and water and earth. So it's not those that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the quadrant archetypes. Now, if we look at the wheel, you'll see that they are going around the wheel: the patriarch, the nymph or angel, the actress, the fool, the warrior, the hearth priestess or queen, the matriarch, and the sage. I'm interested in how these archetypes relate to each other and support each other. We know already that these archetypes do actually sort of affirm each other in various ways. We've seen that before. But the thing here that I'd like to look at is the way the archetypes that are positioned directly opposite each other in the circle support each other. This is the archetypes that Brand Connon refers to as in polarity. And we're talking about things like the angel and the hearth priestess, the fool and the sage, the patriarch and the warrior, and the actress and the matriarch. And these actually form really good working pairs in a sense. They really complement each other and they can really help each other. And I think they are in a lot of ways a really important key to dealing with some of the problems that you might experience with certain sorts of elemental states. This really sort of like occurred to me in real life a few days ago when I was thinking about a problem that I had with certain things, and it seemed to really work. Now, for instance, we could look at, say, the actress. Negative actress can get into problems. They can all get into problems if they're negative, but negative actress can get into problems, and it can tend to be combined with a sort of negative child as well. They can both tend to go backwards at the same time and cause problems. But if you look at negative actress, it sort of gets into a real fix with being worked up and negative and caught up in imaginings, negative imaginings, things that aren't happening at the moment but which have hurt it and which maybe it's going to go through an internal drama over. That's something which the negative actress can do. And so I was thinking about, well, what really helps that? And it occurred to me that what really helps that is the matriarch. The matriarch is an archetype of restraint and of groundedness and of common sense, and the matriarch will bring the actress back down to earth, and it will help her to restrain her own negative manifestations within herself. So it's simply, everything simply calms down, and it's a very helpful thing. I experienced that myself, and I thought, well, this is very helpful. And again, it's the polar archetype that is really helpful here. I thought as well with things like the warrior. What would the warrior do if the warrior was having problems? You know, again, often warrior and fool can play up at the same time. Fool causes problems in the outer. The warrior needs to get things done and can't because everything is disordered, and then he gets frustrated and he gets very angry. So what will help that? Now, Tammo used to say that you bring in the matriarch, and the matriarch restrains the warrior. As far as I'm concerned, that's not going to work. The warrior is a fire archetype, and fire doesn't like to be restrained. When you enclose fire, it becomes pressurized. So that's not a good idea. What fire needs is air. Yeah? Now what fire needs is air, and that gives it space. You bring in the patriarch, you bring the positive patriarch, and it gives the warrior space, but it also gives him the values that he needs to be able to control himself. Just as with the actress, what she needed was the containment of the matriarch, because water needs containment. That's what gives it security. Yeah. So the actress needed the containment of the matriarch, and the warrior needs the freedom afforded to it and the relief afforded to it by having values that it can listen to and that it can then use to actually manage itself. And you see, this way it will work. Similarly, if you try to use the patriarch on the actress, that's not going to work very well either, because she doesn't need air. Yeah, she needs the earth. She needs the earth to contain her. She needs to have something to help her to contain herself, so that she can recompose herself in a sense. Yeah. Whereas the patriarch would simply be an external judgment, which would not go down well at all. So I saw that these things were actually working really quite nicely. And what was really interesting about that is that the warrior and the actress are both what you might call outer archetypes. They're archetypes which are very involved in the outer journey, dealing with the outer world. They are fixed archetypes, and they are outer archetypes. But when they are kind of going backwards and getting into problems, what's happening is they are kind of introverting what should be an extroverted energy in a sense. They are internalizing what should be an external energy, and so they get an inner problem, even though they're outer archetypes. Their polar archetypes help them in as much as they are themselves outer archetypes. They speak the same language as them, and because they complete them in a sense, making all of the elements between the two of them, they can be very helpful to them. And what they can do is that they can actually help to resolve and sort out the inner problem of their polar archetype. They sort out their inner problem, even though they are outer archetypes, and they can do it in a language that the archetype they are directed to can understand. So the patriarch speaks the language which the warrior can understand. The matriarch speaks the language which the actress can understand, and so these work out much better that way. Yeah. If you then look at the what you might call the inner archetypes, or the open archetypes, which is sage, fool, angel or child, and hearth priestess or queen. You look at them, and again, they form very good pairings. They form very good pairings. Now, interestingly, when the outer archetypes malfunction, they end up with inner problems. When the inner archetypes malfunction, they end up with outer problems. Because their inward energy has been externalized. Yeah. So the fool's freedom is transposed into the outer world, where it causes problems and somebody will get into trouble with that. The child, if its energy is externalized, it's very exposed, it's very vulnerable, and its innocence is very easily hurt in that situation. The Hearth Priestess, has this great bodily energy of bodily being within her. Yeah, if it's externalized, it becomes exhausted, and it becomes simply like a drudge. You know, it's not valued for its spiritual inequality, for its inner spirit. Yeah, and with the sage, if its openness, but its impassive, uninvolved openness is externalized, then it becomes kind of almost, not exactly catatonic, but it becomes highly ineffective. It can't do anything, and it's in the outside world where things always need to be done, so it has problems. Now there the polar archetypes do again help, yeah, and the polar archetypes, as far as I can see, they help anyway. And now what do they do? Well, with I think with the child gets the Hearth Priestess, and it gives it a sense of being, which gives it a sense of centeredness and groundedness. The Hearth Priestess also, from the child or the angel, gets its sense of imagination back and its sense of its spirituality back, I think. It manages to sort of like to recognize its own spirituality again and recognize its worth in a sense. And also it's, you know, it's like it is almost like mother and child. Those two things are like mother and child, those two archetypes. And so you see the way that they kind of they have a symbiosis. The Fool, well, the Sage again gives the Fool space, and it gives it calmness. It slows things down, and so then the Fool can actually turn its energies back towards the inner world and seek its freedom there. And meanwhile, the outer world can settle. Yeah. And with the Sage, which is too impassive in the outer world, again, the Fool can kind of like get it involved. It can bring life into it, and involvement and inspiration, and then it can return to where it needs to be. Now, all of these archetypes are inner archetypes, but at the same time, what are they doing? Because the outer archetypes, they helped each other through sorting out the inner problems. Now, the inner archetypes sort out what effectively in the end are outer problems, but it seems like they're also doing it through the inner somehow. Their influence is an inner one, I would think, yeah. And yet what they do is they manage to sort out the outer by allowing them to return to the inner, in a sense. But I think I need to think about that a little bit more to get it really straight. But anyway, I hope that gives a little sense of how these archetypes can really help each other, these polar archetypes, directly across the circle from each other. Again, if you look at them all, each polar pair have all the elements between them, but they have them in a form which is easier for them to relate to. So, for instance, the Hearth Priestess needs air and water, but whereas it's easy for the Hearth Priestess to relate to the angel child, it's more difficult for it to relate to the patriarch, yeah, and vice versa. Similarly with the Fool, the Fool needs earth and air, but whereas it's easy for it to relate to air and earth, the Sage, it's more difficult for it to relate to the matriarch. And so it gives them all the elements in completeness, but in a form which is easier for them to relate to. There are other patterns you'll be able to see in it too, but I want to kind of keep this video simple, and I'm not going into the cardinals here because those take a little bit more, I think, because they are very primal archetypes, and that tends to bring in the triads, which I've talked about in other videos. I hope that makes sense. I hope it's helpful. It's worth thinking about which states you maybe have some problems with, and then seeing if the polar archetype, if that state actually can offer some relief and some help to balance things out. But I hope that's helpful. Okay.